This is lesson 2 of our unit on tessellations, and in this lesson, you guys are going to be learning what a tessellation is. So, um, and in order to tessellate, we have to go back to a couple of grade 7 concepts, predominantly transformations, okay? So, but before we get there, let's move on. So, what are tessellations? Tessellations, you see them everywhere. You can see them in nature. For example, this is a tessellation. These rocks here, which have been hollowed out, if they're part of Samoan culture, I believe they hollow them out to create stone tools. This pattern within this honeycomb and a beehive is a tessellation on the acorn, spider webs, as well as the scales on the snake. These are tessellations. Now, I'm sure you have some guesses as to what a tessellation is, but I want to show you some in society now. They're all over. They are in art. They are in architecture. They are in landscape designs. They are in, again, architectural programs, and they are in basic computer graphics. Okay? Tessellations are all over. And based on these items, as well as these items, you could probably have a pretty good guess what a tessellation is. What a tessellation is, it is a repeated pattern over and over again. It's when shapes create repeated patterns over and over again, and they cover a plane. A plane is the area in which this repeated pattern is on. So if I say the tessellate the plane, it means created a repeated pattern over this space, okay? But you need to know it's a tessellation if there are no gaps between those shapes and there are absolutely no overlaps between those shapes. If I go back to these ones, right? Although this is a fish, we'll talk about this particular style of tessellation later, but there are no gaps between the fish and the birds, and there are no, what was it? There are no gaps and there are no overlaps, okay? Same with this pattern on this ceiling of this architecture. Same with this one here. If you go back to the honeycomb, there are no gaps between each honeycomb and there are no overlaps, just like the tiling on the floor, the scales on a snake. Okay? And that is what a tessellation is. But now, you create tessellations by taking various polygons and doing transformations with them. So you transform those polygons over a plane. Now there are 3 types of transformations that can create tessellations. The first is a translation. Now, if you remember back to grade 7, a translation is simply sliding. You simply slide that figure from one point to the next. If I were to go to this transformation, I'm simply sliding it right to there. And you can slide them beside one another. For instance, if I were to take this rectangle here and I were to, let's clone it, you could create a tessellation. I could cover this entire plane by sliding this as long as they bump up and they are touching. There's no overlap between one another. Okay, you have a tessellation. I could cover this entire page with this square, and all I'm doing with this square is I am translating it. I am sliding it all around. And if I were to cover this entire page up, that would make a tessellation, a repeated pattern with polygons on this page. The other type of transformation you can create a tessellation with is a rotation. That is where you have a fixed point and then you just rotate it. You turn it or spin it. And if you rotate that figure over and over and over again, you could have a tessellation. For example, if I were to create this triangle, maybe if I try, I guess I'll unlock all, and I will clone this guy and lock it. I believe I should be able to tessellate the plane. I'll take that guy, and then I will take this guy, and I will rotate it. See, I'm rotating that triangle. You've got to rotate it at the correct angle, though. There, I've rotated it. Okay. And if I were to do this on the entire page, I know this is a perfect triangle I've created to begin with, but if I were to do this on the entire page, I should be able to tessellate the plane. And again, these triangles are not perfectly made to begin with, so they are not going to work 100% correctly, but you get the gist. I could repeat this pattern by simply rotating the shapes as a form of transformation to create this tessellation. I could cover the entire plane and create this design just as such. And I could continue to do that throughout the entire page. And the last one is pretty simple. It's like looking in a mirror. The last type of transformation, which you can create a tessellation is a reflection. You remember a reflection? It's like looking over an image and flipping it over. Okay? So if I were to unlock this page, if I were to take this guy here and I'm going to, no, I'm not going to clone. Yeah, sure, I'll clone him. And I were to take a figure and I were to flip it, so you can't tessellate it like this, but if I were to, can I flip it? Go like this. Assume I just like flipped it over like that. I suppose that is a rotation. If I were to turn it over this line of symmetry, I could create myself a bit of a tessellation by rotating or by reflecting. So this particular shape, I could rotate it, or I could reflect it, and then I could rotate it like such. I can rotate it into there. There, and I'm starting to create, well, it's not a very good one, but I'm starting to create a tessellation with this object. Now, thus far, what you need to know is I've created tessellations using rotations, reflections, and translations. And I've just used one shape, but if you look at this shape, all of a sudden, you're going to need to add a different type of polygon in there because it's just not going to work with this particular type of shape. Now, if I go like this, I can start to create designs within this. Anyway, you get the gist of it. And then you can add these in as you go and create your, although that does have overlap. But you can create a tessellation and tessellate the plane with various polygons. Okay? So again, transformations, they are, you take this and you just slide it. You slide it, slide it, slide it. And sliding it, and sliding it. Okay, you could translate this polygon. You could also rotate this polygon to make it fit in this space like such. Right? Now I'm creating a tessellation design with rotations and translations. Okay, but I'm just repeating those patterns in the space. Again, stars, I'm simply translating. I'm covering a space with no gaps and no spaces in there. I could also add a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I could add pentagons between the stars. I should add pentagons between the stars to complete that space. Okay? Here, rotations. Again, you wouldn't use this circle because it is non-polygon as we discussed in last lesson. But you simply rotate this guy. You simply rotate it. And you can rotate that throughout the page to create a tessellation. Or reflection, you reflect this over the line of symmetry or the line of reflection, and you create yourself a tessellation. All right. And that's where we're going to stop this lesson for the time being. So before we move on to next lesson, which will be next week, you need to know that certain polygons won't tessellate and certain polygons will. They will tessellate an entire plane. But thus far, I'm just teaching you guys. You need to know what a tessellation is with this lesson and the various types of transformations you use to tessellate polygons.